Good morning and welcome to another Seize the Day. Today is Wednesday, May 14th, and I'm glad that we get the opportunity to spend this morning together. Trust you guys are waking up feeling refreshed and ready to begin a new day, to seize this day. It's We are in week 8 of our Casket Empty series. This is all about the good news of Jesus being shared with the world. We began in this, and part of this series is now under the heading of Pentecost, where the Spirit of God, the gift that the Father had promised, is now poured out to the church. Every nation, every tongue, we have seen as now, by virtue of their faith in the work and in the person of Jesus, they have now been the recipient of the Holy Spirit, a spirit of promise, a spirit of that promises to guide us into all truth, a spirit that says that He will be our comforter, a spirit that says that He will reveal to us the things that are in the mind of God. 1 Corinthians chapter 2 says that we have received not the spirit of the world, but the Spirit that has come from the Father, that we may understand all the things that the Father has given to us. And so this Spirit is guiding us. It's convicting us of sin and righteousness and judgment. It's what causes us to be one family, right? We saw in the text in Ephesians chapter 4, it says there is one Lord, one faith, one baptism, one body, one Spirit. And this is the unity of what that God is creating all over the world. This is the kingdom that God has in mind for us. So we went from the Spirit being poured out to the Spirit empowering for mission, and we saw how that begins. Right, this work is now through the Apostle Peter and John. We begin to see that, man, it's having this great impact. God then turns around, and what does He do? He brings Paul from being a persecutor of the church to now he's going to be its strongest proponent. He's out there, and we see him having experienced great fruit, but the winds of opposition are really blowing pretty strong. And so we've been picking it up in one of the longest narratives in our study here in the book of Acts chapter 19, where Paul is at the Areopagus. And so I'd like to pick this up for you. Yesterday, I started to talk a little bit about the Areopagus. We talked about the two schools of philosophy that were in Athens, Greece at this time. And we said that they were, the Epicureans were known as those who, perhaps you could say, their attitude was, hey, life's a beach, right? Just chill, go with the flow. This is what this life is supposed to be about. Over against the Stoics that had a much more, suck it up, buttercup. Let's go. Let's get with the program. No excuses. It's not what life does to you, but how you manage it. So let's, by sheer discipline and willpower, let's get going. So we saw then in this text that this group of Epicurean and Stoic philosophers began to dispute with Paul. Some of them asked, what is this babbler trying to say? Others remarked, he seems to be advocating foreign gods. And when we looked at this, it was because when they heard Jesus and the resurrection, they thought of two individual people. They thought Jesus was a god, and what is known as the resurrection, in Greek, the name is Anastasis. And so they thought it was a female cohort. Because remember, here we are in Greece, and this is the Areopagus where Paul is about to speak, and you can see in the background you have the Pantheon, a temple dedicated to Athena, right? In the foreground the rocks all around. This was known in the Roman day as Mars Hill, and the Greeks called it the Areopagus. It was a place where the leading officials of the city would come, and they would talk about civil matters, but they would also share the ideas and philosophies of the day. And they were having a tremendous impact on the people of Athens. So here we are in this setting with the four in the background, just these temples, listed to their gods. And now what I want you to do is I want you to just follow along with me in Acts chapter 17 as we think through what Paul's message to these Athenians really is. He starts off by saying, listen, this is verse 22. He stands up in the meeting of the Areopagus and says to the men of Athens, I see that in every way you are very religious. For as I walked around and looked carefully at your objects of worship, I even found an altar with this inscription, to an unknown God. So now what you worship as something unknown, I'm going to proclaim to you. And what is that really? This altar of an unknown God, is it saying that the unknown God can never be known? Because that's an absolute, isn't it? When you say it can't be known, what you're saying is it can never be known. And so the attitude, right, of the Epicurean and the Stoics was that, listen, if there is a God, he's so far away, he's not involved at all with our lives. So we don't know, we can't know. And they liked it like that. There's simply, in their estimation, not enough evidence for us to be able to know with certainty. Or how about if the unknown God was really, a plea to maybe, is there a possibility that we might know him? Is it worth keeping the door of my heart open? Are they even the slightest bit curious? And if it is, if there's going to be an answer, it's going to have to lie beyond themselves, right? And the reason for that is, as too many of us have discovered, that inward journey that sometimes we take it's a dead end. It's sprinkled with idols that reveal our failure to gain understanding. We taking a look inward, we're always going to be limited by our perceptions, by our presuppositions, just like the Epicureans and Stoics were. They were giving voice to a philosophy of life to try to make the best out of their life, but it left God and his revelation completely out of the picture. And so Paul is saying, listen, I realize that you guys have this outward spirituality, but you're too inwardly focused. And so he's saying, listen, what you worship as something unknown, I'm going to proclaim to you. Well, that's a bold statement, isn't it? Because these philosophers have excluded the possibility by their own philosophies, right, that God had something to say. Yet, whenever we open up our Bibles, from the times of creation to the book of Revelation, God has consistently demonstrated that he is the revealer. He is the one who opens the minds to enable our understanding. And so Paul now wants to bring this message to the world. And we're going to see that straight away, right? What we see now, look at verse 24 and 25. He says, the God who made the world and everything in it is the Lord of heaven and earth. He does not live in temples built by hands. He's not served by human hands as if he needed anything, because he himself gives all men life and breath and everything else. So just like any philosophy is going to assert their truth, Paul is now going back to the testimony of Scripture. And he's saying, listen, we know that God is the one who made the world. God is the creator. He is Lord over all of his creation. And so that begins to set the foundation here for us, that God is first cause. He's the architect and overseer of all things. See, what this does is it places them in a position where they're either going to reject that truth, or if they open the door of possibility that God is exactly as Paul is describing him, then he is a force to be reckoned with. That means that God isn't in any of those temples that they have. And think like what I showed you, right? Here you have the Parthenon in the background. This really architectural marvel of the world is standing high on this hill, and they're all sitting here at the Areopagus looking up at that, and and Paul is saying, yeah, God doesn't live in temples like that. He doesn't live in buildings built by hands. In fact, he's not even served by human hands. So all these idols that proliferate this city, he goes, God doesn't need anything. In fact, God is the one who is the provider. So contrary to the preponderance of idols, God doesn't live in their idols. He's not served by their human hands. He's not in need of anything. He is the one who's giving men life, breath, and everything else. One other little side thing that I want you to notice, and sometimes you read this in cards when someone dies. They mean well. They'll be like, well, God is in the trees, God is in the wind that blows, He's in the flowers of the field. Now, let me. I want you to be really clear about this, because this is good theology. Okay, we don't serve a God. We don't serve a God who is in creation. We serve a God who stands above His creation. So I'm not looking out at the ocean as if the ocean itself is divine. The only creation that bears the image of the divine is you and me. It says we were created in the image of God. But aside from humanity, the creation is a work of God. He is not it, and it is not he. So we get far away from any of this pantheistic kind of thought. No, 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 no. That's a slippery slope that can easily lead to idolatry, which you can see in the days of Athens. That was a big part. So people can worship the sun. They could worship the rivers. They can worship the beasts that remind them of certain qualities. Yeah, yeah. And what they're trying to do is manipulate the gods so that their lives would be better. And yet God has been consistent throughout his revelation that he is first cause. He's the architect of life. He's the overseer of all things. So why would I not want to know him better? So the message that Paul is bringing to this world of ideas is that you got to begin first with understanding that God is the one who is Lord over all creation. Then he goes on and he says this: from one man he made every nation of men, that they should inhabit the whole earth. And he determined the times set for them and the exact places where they should live. I want you to look at verse 26 here a little closer. Notice it says, from one man he made every nation of men. So that we have one God and Father of us all, who is in all and is working through all. So there is this common denominator now that we find ourselves related where all the way back to that garden where God created Adam and Eve in his image, and God placed them over his creation to rule over it, to subdue it, to be fruitful and multiply. And his intention was that they would inhabit then this whole earth. People who knew him, were in fellowship with him, who would be the recipients of all that God had created. It was to be a blessed experience. And yet sin enters into the world. And as a result, it says what was meant to bear the marks of eternity, now we begin to realize that no, it is, we have certain amount of years. Our mortality is beginning to show the corruptibility of this flesh, right? The temporalness of creation. I mean, you can see behind me, right? The leaves have begun to pop, but on one of my trees, it's still waiting. The buds are there, but they're not quite there yet. It's just another visible reminder of the seasons, right? And and then one day, before we even know it, right? It doesn't seem like summer will last too long. That we're heading into the fall. The leaves are changing, signs of their mortality. They'll fall, and then everything is barren again. Yeah, it's this is demonstrating to us that God is the one who determines the times set for us and the exact places where they should live. It is God who determines then, establishing man's time and boundaries. We're not in as much control as we assume. But you know what else this is saying to you and me? If God made all things, and God is the one who is determining our days, right? And about and the boundaries, uh, then that means that God knows the end from the beginning. But it also means that if he is knowing your time and your place, and that means that God also has a plan which he is working out. So when the Epicureans and the Stoics were bold enough to say that there are no gods, if there was a God, he's too busy. He's not dealing with mankind. So therefore, listen, just seek that ideal life. Just get along. Just go with the flow. Life's a beach. Or the other ones that saying no. You're going to have to harness your own destiny. You're going to have to captain your own ship. You're going to have to do it all on your own. No, God's not saying that here. God's saying that he's working in concert with humanity. He created it all, and he is the determining factor behind it all. So wouldn't it be good then to understand something of the mind of God? Wouldn't it be great to understand something of what God has in store for us? And I remember there was a gentleman in a church that I had in Tarrytown, New York, and he was in his late 20s, very bright. His name was Bob, and Bob had was born with hemophilia, and so he couldn't really play sports. Constantly getting blood transfusions. Just he just was never really able to just play any of these rough and tumble kind of sports, and yet he had a love for sport. So he took that love for sport and became a writer, and he wrote. By the time he graduated from college, he had written a book about the Michigan football team, and so he was bright. And eventually, I get to know him because when he moved to New York, they hired him to do the front page spread on the sports edition for the Daily News. And because the weekends were such horrific for him, his wife was coming to the church, and I started a Bible study in the middle of the week, and so it was early, and so he would come, and I didn't really know Bob that well, and so one day I said to him, I said, "Listen, why don't we go out and grab a bite, and I'd like to get to know you a little bit." So he opens up and tells me this story about him having hemophilia. And then he got really quiet and he looked at me and he says, "Pastor," he says, "because I've had so many blood transfusions, I've also contracted the AIDS virus." And he says, "So I have AIDS and it's been flaring up." And he says, "So that's one of the reasons why I started coming back to church, because I'm just trying to figure out what this is all about. And through our interaction, there was a passage that's found in the book of Habakkuk, where God says that he's going to reveal his plan to Habakkuk, and he wants him to write it down because it will come to pass. And he said, Pastor, when you read that text, it dawned on me that maybe God has a plan, which also has to include my life, which is seemingly so out of control. He says, I got to a place where I was so angry that I went on a tear for about a year and a half, drinking and drugging and just trying to numb this pain that was inside of me. And now he says, I just realized that it was just making everything worse. He goes, I'm trying to look for some respite, some peace, something in all of this. And we began to have these Bible studies, and he would always turn to passages like this one, where it says that God is the one who determines the times, our times, and the exact places, the boundaries of our habitation. He's in he's in control. And you know what that did for Bob? It brought a settledness into his life, saying it wouldn't be his plan, to be honest. But he says, but I have to take, I take a lot of comfort in that God has a plan and that he's going to reveal it. And that plan includes an eternity where I will be with him, that one day this body that is broken is going to be mended, that somehow or another now I will see God as he is. And he made peace with God. And you know how Bob died? It was from complications from the AIDS virus, but he was put in hospice, and I would come to visit him in his home. And one day he had slipped into a bit of a coma, and so he hadn't been speaking for a good day and a half. And he was, as I said, at home. They had a bed for him on the first floor. So I come to visit him one day, and everyone's talking around his bed. There was one woman in our congregation who was a fabulous singer, and she was singing the song "Amazing Grace," and everybody was kind of teary-eyed, and we're just listening to Louise sing. And all of a sudden, Bob opens his eyes, and he sees me, and he says, "Pastor Bruce," he says, "can you read the Bible for me?" As clear as day. Everyone was like just shocked. And so I immediately said, "Of course," right? And I came over, I sat next to him, and he closed his eyes, and I began to read to him from 1 Corinthians chapter 15. 1 Corinthians chapter 15 is a great passage that deals with resurrection, this new body that we're going to receive. And I was reading him all these promises, and Bob Kotakis died in that moment as I was whispering into his ear what God was planning on doing, the promises that he had made to each and every one of us, but in particular to Bob at this moment in his life. I'll never forget that moment, because it was one that says to me, God is intimately involved with his creation. Contrary to what the Epicureans and Stoics are telling everybody. No, the God who made it all isn't. No, God, he's the one who made everything, but he's also the determining factor. He's got a plan. And from our vantage point, sometimes we get a little confused by it. But if you were looking at the days when Jesus was crucified on that cross, it would have been very confusing. But now, as we look back on those days, do we not see that Jesus died for the sins of men and rose for our justification, so that he becomes for us the promise of life eternal? I am the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me, though he were dead, yet shall he live. Yes, my friends, this is exactly what God's plan was all about. So God has a plan and he's working it out. And it is what should call forth our best efforts as we live out our life. Think of what can be accomplished when we give ourselves to pleasing him. Well, my friends, our time is up for this morning, but I hope these words would encourage you, that they would begin to give you a hint as how am I to approach a world that's filled with so many ideas? Well, I gave you two things already. One, it has to start with God as the creator of all things. And second, that God is intimately concerned about his creation. God has a plan, and he is working it. Well, there are a few more things that Paul is going to go on to say and to teach that I think would benefit us well as we engage the world ourselves. So, my friends, I want to thank you for joining me on this Wednesday, the 14th. And Lord willing, we'll see each other again tomorrow as we continue our study. So God bless you. Go out, seize the day, never forgetting that God is good all the time. God bless.